We answer your mailbag questions next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. This episode is sponsored by Stance Apparel. Stance believes that the perfect fit matters more than fitting in. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. And we return here. It is a midweek edition of Locked On Ravens. Baltimore standing at 8-6 and out of the playoff race at this point. Kind of unfortunate, all things considered. They were in the lead in AFC North heading into Week 15, and they come out of a playoff spot completely. The season's not over. There's still a lot more football to be played, a really big matchup in Week 16. Obviously, we'll talk about that throughout the rest of the week here. But today we have some mailbag questions to answer, talking a bit about the Ravens, and we will have two segments full of mailbag questions and just what this team is going through, has gone through, and everything in between for the 2021 season and ahead as we head into the final three games of this year. We'll do that in the second and the third segments. And in the first segment, I just want to go over general Ravens stuff, talk a bit about the Ravens practice squad protection, some COVID-19 reserve list additions and subtractions, and just how this team might be thin at a couple positions heading into Week 16, which might not be ideal considering the Cincinnati Bengals took it to Baltimore the first time, although I think the Ravens will be pretty motivated this time around. So again, we'll do general Ravens news, notes, and quotes in the first segment. In the second and third segments, we'll answer your mailbag questions. And again, if you want to submit a mailbag question of your own, I put out a tweet on the Locked On Ravens Twitter account every Monday evening-ish. And if you comment a question or however many you have below there, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And I greatly appreciate everybody who has already submitted mailbag questions before, whether it's this week or last week or however many weeks or months ago. Thank you for doing so. And before we jump into all the content, be sure to follow the podcast, both in audio form and video form. If you're here with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow the show, turn notifications on. Our content comes out Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern time. Also, if you're here with us on YouTube, you see my face and my background and everything. Be sure to like the video here, subscribe to the channel. It really does help out, and I greatly appreciate everybody who has already done that and continues to do those things. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosStriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So with all that being said, let's jump right in, starting off with our general Ravens news, notes, and quotes segment. We'll start off with some COVID-19 reserve list news. As the Ravens, they did activate Pernell McPhee from injured reserve on Monday, but he is now not with the team again, as he was placed on the reserve COVID list on Tuesday. And if he is not vaccinated, he will be out for the full 10 days, much like if Justin Houston is not vaccinated, he will be out for the full 10 days. It leaves the Ravens with just three outside linebackers on their roster: Tyus Bowser, Odafe Oweh, and Jalen Ferguson. So those three will be manning the fort if Houston and McPhee aren't ready. They don't have any outside linebackers on their practice squad. Malik Harrison has done some work on the outside, and we've seen him line up there in games, and he's been doing work there in practice. Dalen Hayes, if he's activated off of injured reserve, could be an option, but it's a very big if considering he hasn't practiced in months, and the Ravens tend to like to ramp up their guys before they end up being back on the field in a full or even limited capacity. So, looking at that, it could be a bit of a challenge to get Dalen Hayes up to speed. So hopefully Houston and McPhee will be ready. They'll be able to put some negative tests out there for the Ravens. But if they're not, it's next man up again. The Ravens went into Week 15 with a very decimated secondary. And the secondary is going to be decimated for the rest of the season. But hopefully they'll get guys back like Chuck Clark, Jimmy Smith, maybe Sammy Watkins in the wide receiver room. So we'll see what ends up happening. The Ravens did activate wide receiver Benjamin Victor off the reserve COVID list. So he is back on the practice squad now. They also placed corner Kevin Tolliver on the COVID list. He's a practice squad cornerback for them. So guys going off the list, guys going on the list. It's roster shuffling central, as we've seen for the Baltimore Ravens in 2021. And it's not going to change one bit as we head into the final couple weeks here and into the playoffs and in a couple key weeks for the Ravens. For sure, the practice squad protections for the Ravens this week are cornerback Robert Jackson, guard and defensive tackle Khalil McKenzie, offensive tackle David Sharp, and inside linebacker Joe Thomas. Now, I thought David Sharp played pretty well. Tyree Phillips, hopefully he gets better soon. It seems like he might be out. There's no definitive update as of this recording, but it seems like he could be out for a little bit. Wasn't able to put weight on his leg coming off the field against Green Bay. Phillips has struggled at tackle. He is not a tackle, in my opinion. He is more of a guard at this stage of his career. He has struggled immensely at right tackle. He's not played very well. Sharp came in and held his own. Played some really good snaps against Green Bay. I was pleased with that. You have Ben Cleveland coming in for Ben Powers and doing a decent job there. And I think that the offensive line for Baltimore in Week 15 performed a lot better than we have seen. I think Alejandro Villanueva had one of his better games. And, just overall consistency across this line for the Ravens over the final 3 weeks is going to be huge for them. We saw the run game really rip off a couple big runs, and we haven't seen that from them. I mean, it's been tough. Without J.K. Dobbins, without Gus Edwards, they're missing that home run ability, the big play ability. But you kind of factor that in also with the fact that they don't have Ronnie Stanley this season. They have been rotating guys at right tackle and left guard for the majority of the year. It's been tough for them. So overall, when looking at just how this team has operated, I think it's been impressive, but at the same time, with the goals that they have and the aspirations that they have, they need to have the offensive line play better, and we did see glimpses of that. So I wouldn't be shocked if Sharp is called up once again. I wouldn't be shocked that Ravens have a couple of COVID call-ups, whether they need some COVID replacement players, because throughout the week here, we could see more and more players. If Justin Houston did, in fact, test positive, and same thing with Pernell McPhee, it becomes a worry of, all right, Houston was around those guys, and McPhee was around those guys on the sideline, too. We saw him next to Lamar Jackson on a couple of those mic'd up clips, or one of those mic'd up clips. I can't remember. It might have been the Harbaugh one. But, it's maybe the Ravens could go into this game with one or no outside linebackers, which would put them in a real bind. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully guys are able to come back and nobody else goes on the COVID list. Guys are able to recover. But at this stage, we really just don't know at this point. And going back to some stuff that John Harbaugh said during his Monday press conference with media, he is hopeful. It seemed like that Lamar Jackson could play this week, but he also made it clear that he is ready to roll with Tyler Huntley if he needs to again. And look, there's no quarterback controversy in Baltimore. I do want to put that out there. It's been really cool, though, to see Tyler Huntley's recognition that he's gotten for what he's done. Like, he's earned it. And that's not saying that Lamar Jackson is not the starter and Tyler Huntley's better. I don't believe all that. Lamar Jackson is a star. Lamar Jackson is the starter of this team, and that is not going to change. And it shouldn't change because Jackson is the better player. No shade to Tyler Huntley, but it's just true. Lamar Jackson is the better quarterback. There should be no debate on whether Jackson or Huntley is the starter, but you have to feel great if you're the Ravens right now, knowing that you have players in Tyler Huntley and a couple, we've seen it throughout the entire season in multiple positions, but with Huntley in particular, a backup quarterback that can come in and keep the Ravens competitive. You see backup quarterbacks all across the league just derail seasons, if the starter goes out because they are just not up to the quality that they need them to be. The Ravens found a great player in Tyler Huntley. You now can trust Tyler Huntley if Jackson isn't 100% and, he's injured and can't move fully to say, you know what, we don't want to risk Jackson for re-injury. We feel confident that we can rest Jackson for another week and get him back to full strength, and then Huntley can come in and still keep this team competitive. That is where I think I would feel confident if I'm the Ravens right now. It's not necessarily, we have two starter quality quarterbacks. Because, look, they do, but one starter is better than the other right now, and that is obviously Lamar Jackson. I feel like people are kind of quick to forget a lot of the things Lamar Jackson has done. People see the struggles recently, and again, this is what have you done for me now lately, league, so people look at what has happened recently. Jackson has struggled over the past month or so that he's been in. And people are saying, well, is Lamar Jackson a starter? Is Lamar Jackson falling off? No, he's 24 years old. All right. It's good that the Ravens have these two quarterbacks. You don't have to tear one down to pick another up and say, this guy is played terribly and this guy's playing better. So now obviously Lamar Jackson's the backup. That is not what it is. Lamar Jackson is the starter of this team. But I feel great knowing that Tyler Huntley's the backup and he can come in and he's proven that he can just lead this team down the field. lead this team in close games. And I know he is 1-2 when he's come into the game. You know, he's 1-1 as a starter because he technically didn't start the Cleveland game because Jackson got injured in it. But look, I'm happy Huntley's getting the recognition he deserves, but at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson is still the starting quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens, and that should in no way, shape, or form change whatsoever. We'll head into our first break, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into our first batch of mailbag questions, so stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Super Bowl 56 at SoFi is less than 100 days away, and On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL, is the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package. Select your exact seats and choose from elite experiences featuring an exclusive pregame celebration with NFL legends, 5-star LA hotels, and food by the great Wolfgang Puck. Visit onlocationexp.com/SB56 more information or search Super Bowl On Location. That's onlocationexp.com/SB56 or search Super Bowl On Location. We returned here. It's our second segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. And we're now going to dive into some mailbag questions, some really good ones here today, of course, as usual. And we'll start off with a question here from Be More Finest, or more of some points made by Be More Finest. And he says, playoffs start now, go 6-0 and got faith in the 7th game. We're undefeated in the Super Bowl. Can Lamar see Snoop timing and get himself back on track with his timing? Also, if Lamar's dealing with health issues, that is screwing up his timing and play and that price tag down. So option him. All right, a lot to dive into here. First off the bat here from Be More Finest. Yes, I agree the playoffs do start now. This is important. I think that they can still lose to the Rams and make the playoffs. If they win their divisional games, they can make the playoffs. They can probably do a lot more if they win all three. I think that's a guaranteed playoff spot, regardless of if it's the North or if it's a wild card spot, regardless. But I think that 10-7, if they can pull that off, but winning against both the Bengals and the Steelers, if they can do that, I think this is a playoff team. I think that is enough. And then obviously you got to go 4-0 or 3-0 or whatever in the playoffs. And yes, the Ravens are undefeated in the Super Bowl. It's a whole different season when January, February rolls around. And this team, they've proven the impossible. They've done what people say they cannot do with all the injuries and then the COVID absences that they've had. They've stuck in games that they have no business being in. They've won games they have no business winning. The miraculous comebacks, the amazing performances. They still have talent. This is not like all of a sudden they have nothing, but they have to weather the storm, next man up mentality. So yeah, playoffs do start now for the Ravens. It's a huge time for them to be able to go out there and perform. And with Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, the timing stuff, get himself back on track with the timing. Tyler Huntley's played great. Lamar Jackson has struggled. You know, it's those are facts. But I do think that with the rest, with getting back to hopefully what will be close to 100%, if not fully 100%, Lamar Jackson has been in the league longer than Tyler Huntley. Lamar Jackson knows some things, and there are things that both quarterbacks can learn. Lamar Jackson's not a perfect player. Tyler Huntley's not a perfect player. Lamar Jackson is still a better player than Tyler Huntley, but Lamar Jackson can learn a couple things from Tyler Huntley. Tyler Huntley can learn a couple things from Lamar Jackson. This isn't like just because Lamar Jackson has struggled over the past month that, you know, he can't throw anymore. He can't be an athletic playmaker anymore. There are some of those misconceptions where people think that the skills of Lamar Jackson have just been sapped, and people are starting to put him in Tyler Huntley and saying, oh, did Tyler Huntley steal Lamar Jackson's this and Lamar Jackson's that? No, Lamar Jackson, I think, does have to get back on track. I mean, that is a complete fact. So I think that for what he's been doing this season, we saw the great start to the year for him, and now he's been struggling. In terms of if his price tag is down, I mean, Lamar Jackson is going to get a ton of money regardless. This isn't a situation where it's like, oh, Lamar Jackson was going to make $45 million, and now he struggled for a month, and now he's going to make $15 million a year. Like, no, he's still probably going to make, at the very, very low end, probably around $30 million a season. At the high end, I could see 45, even 50, depending on what happens, you know, Super Bowl, deep playoff run, whatever. But this isn't all of a sudden like, oh, the Ravens are going to get a bargain deal because he's been playing bad over the past month. No, he's still going to make a ton of money. The Ravens are still going to have some decisions to make with their other players. So it'll be interesting to see how it ends up working and the contract and just everything. It's been a key talking point for the better half of a year now. So when it actually comes out, it'll be really interesting. So, you know, if the Ravens say, oh, you know, you performed badly over the past month, we want to drop that price down, Lamar Jackson will say, all right, well, look at what I've done for you. Are you sure you want to drop that price tag $2 million a season, or do you want me to stay? And I don't think it's going to get that toxic, right? Both Lamar Jackson and the Ravens want a long-term partnership. They want to work something out. They're not going to kind of blackmail the other or do something crazy like that, I don't think. But yeah, the price tag will be interesting to see what he ends up getting at the end of this season. But a Super Bowl would make him a ton of money. I know that that's an absolute fact. Our next question here, it's coming from Positive Vibes 0611. And he asks, is it too soon to start wondering if Lamar signs the deal before or after a decision is made on Roman? Clearly, the two sides are waiting on something, right? And so, yeah, with a contract like Lamar Jackson's, there are so many small details to iron out, and so many big ones as well, obviously. So you don't want to rush those types of things. Lamar Jackson is not working with an official agent. He's having his mom help him out with it. He's self-negotiating. So, they want to make sure everything's right with it, and the Ravens want to make sure everything's right with it as well. I don't think they're in any hurry or anything. I wasn't totally shocked when Lamar Jackson and the Ravens didn't come to an agreement. I was more shocked with the fact that Josh Allen was first. I expected Lamar Jackson's extension to come first, but Jackson bet on himself, and rightfully so. I mean, it's kind of been so-so this year, right? He hasn't performed terribly. He hasn't performed amazing, though. He's had amazing performances. He's had terrible performances, but it hasn't been like he's been a top 2 quarterback. He also hasn't been a top, 30 quarterback in terms of, he's the worst or second worst quarterback in the league. He's been right in the middle of this season, I think, just with, weighing the amazing performances with the struggles. Now, in terms of if they're waiting on a Roman thing, I don't think that's it. I just think they want to get the money right, the years right, the guaranteed money right. There's a lot of stuff to work out in terms of, injury clauses and how much is guaranteed and how much is a signing bonus and, what are these provisions, no trade clause, all these different minor provisions. So an in-season extension, especially one of this magnitude, is very rare. I'd expect the Ravens and him to agree to an extension this offseason. I would be shocked if they let it go and have him hit free agency and have it go before then. I'd be shocked. I think they're going to come to an agreement this offseason at some point. I don't think it's Roman related. I don't feel like that's the kicker for them, where Jackson's like, if Roman signs, I'm gone. And if he doesn't, then I'm here, something like that. So maybe they were waiting on something to drop, but I'd be a little shocked, I'd say, if it was Roman. It's not a terrible thought. I think there might be something, but for me, I think it's more they just want to get everything right. And for right now, they're focusing on the season more so and not necessarily working on a contract every single day, because Jackson's trying to win on the field. The Ravens front office and staff are trying to put the greatest roster together they can. So I think that's more where it's at right now, instead of, Roman's fired, Roman's not fired. Let's make a decision on that. Our next question here comes from James K, and he asks, how do we get Rashad Bateman more involved? And for Rashad Bateman, yeah, he is a player who does great things with the ball in his hand. There's no debate about that. Rashad Bateman deserves the ball in his hand. And look, there are a lot of players in the Baltimore offense that deserve it, right? Devin Duvernay, we've talked about before in terms of how does he get more involved? Obviously, Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown are great weapons for whoever's throwing the ball to him. You have Devonta Freeman as a pass-catching threat out of the backfield. You have James Prochet, Sammy Watkins. So, it's just, how do you feed all these guys? Well, I think John Harbaugh made a good point when asked about it, and just, how do you get these guys more involved? You don't want to necessarily force feed them the ball, because that can get you in bad situations. But at the same time, I think there are certain situations where quarterbacks just have to look in his direction more, and it's a matter of him just being on the field, gaining the trust, working with the quarterbacks, because look, Mark Andrews has a proven track record at the NFL level. Same thing with Marquise Brown. There's no shot at Rashad Bateman. It's just they have been in the league for longer. That's a fact. So when you're looking at security blankets, Mark Andrews is going to be your number 1 choice, and probably Marquise Brown is going to be your number 2. So when you're looking in those clutch situations, and even if Bateman gets open, which he has plenty of times, a young quarterback like Tyler Huntley coming in and still learning his way is probably going to go to a Mark Andrews or to a Marquise Brown. Now for Bateman, whether it's getting him involved in the short passing game, we've seen him make really clean breaks off of the line, shake his defender, get open deep, get open over the middle, break to the outside. He's done a lot of great things. But for me, it's just a matter of building up a rapport, gaining that trust. I think that's where you start with it. And then you can start designing those plays. Put the ball in his hands, get him on a screen, get him on a short out route, get him on a slant. Some of those things where it's boom, and then he can use some of his quick moves, his agility, his his breaking tackle ability, all this different stuff. He can use that. So it can be a bit frustrating at times in this offense because Greg Roman is not one for trick plays. It seems like where you have weapons to do so. I'm not saying Rashad Bateman is like the trick play master or anything, but you'd like to see Devin Duvernay get involved on some more sweeps or some more trick plays to get the ball in his hands. You want to spread the ball out, but at the same time, it's a matter of who do you trust most on the offense. And at this point, is it going to be Mark Andrews or Rashad Bateman, or Marquise Brown or Rashad Bateman? Currently, Jackson and Huntley have favored Andrews and Brown. And that's been fine. But I do think that Bateman has gotten his fair share of targets. It's just a matter of continuing to grow, to learn on the football field and get more involved. And look, we head into year 2 here for Rashad Bateman during 2022. And I think that for me, that's where I think we can see the full breakout year. But for now, it's just a matter of, getting his confidence up. And we've seen what he can do with the ball in his hands. I agree he deserves it more, but we'll see how they end up working him in the offense. We'll head into our final break. When we get back, we'll be diving into more mailbag questions to round out the show. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar in Built Bar. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. There are so many flavors you'll have a hard time choosing. Built Bar gives you the extra fuel you need to bust down the mall doors and battle the holiday shoppers. People are so passionate about their favorite flavors, they'll fight for it. And you can tell Santa to throw a few of those Built Bars in those stockings. You can dip your Built Bar into a piping hot cup of cocoa, let it melt a little, and give your beverage a bit of that Built Bar flavor. And also, if you like some of the marshmallow treats around the holidays, get your hands on some Built Bar Puffs. They're light, fluffy, and marshmallowy through and through. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. We return here. It's our final segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And we're going to dive into our final batch of mailbag questions. And we're going to start off with 2 here from Ron, and he asks, 1, how did you become a Ravens fan? Oh, I like this question. All right, how did I become a Ravens fan? Well, I'll start off, how did I become an NFL fan? I remember I was very young, and I remember coming downstairs, and my dad was watching the Seahawks and Steelers Super Bowl, and I was kind of like, what is that? And, kind of explained it to me. I didn't really understand anything, but I ended up kind of coming back to, this thing of sports. And growing up, I really only watched Sports Center. It kind of became a thing for me. And, being from Baltimore, I wanted to root for the home team, and that was the Ravens and that was the Orioles. So a big shout out to my dad. I love you, Dad, for everything you do, but also for making me a Ravens fan. So I do appreciate that. My dad grew up as a Vikings fan and kind of transitioned over to being a Ravens fan and kind of put that fandom on me. So here I am as a Ravens fan. It's been great. So again, thank you, Dad. I love you. And yeah, that's really my story of, becoming a Ravens fan and really becoming a sports fanatic. I'm an Orioles fan. I'm a Denver Nuggets fan. Actually, I'm not a lot of people here are Wizards fans, but when I was about 7, I wanted a favorite NBA team. And I said, all right, which name do I like the most? And it was the Denver Nuggets. I'm like, oh, Nuggets, that's cool. I like chicken nuggets. And obviously that's not why they're called that, but I stuck with them. They had Carmelo Anthony there at the time. So for me, my fandoms are Ravens, Orioles, and then Denver Nuggets. And for NHL, I'm a Ducks fan. Same reason for the basketball, wanted a team name. I liked Ducks when I was 7. I'm like, oh, they're the Ducks. Let's do it. So stayed loyal to him ever since, been through the ups and downs for all those franchises. But for the Ravens, it's definitely been more ups. I've been very grateful for that. But next question from Ron, how do you feel about the upcoming divisional matchups? And I've kind of talked about this before a little bit, but obviously I think these are must-win games. Cincinnati, I think it's make or break for this team. If you lose it, you drop to 1-4 in the division. You lose the head-to-head tiebreaker. Cincinnati beats you twice. They sweep you. So if they can beat the Bengals, if they can beat the Steelers, those are games where, yeah, you probably get in at 10-7 because you have an AFC record that's not terrible. You have a divisional record that's 3-3 instead of 1-5 or 2-4. So even in a wild card scenario, it does come down to tiebreakers. Like if the Ravens and the Colts are vying for a wild card spot at 10-7 or 9-8, then the Ravens get that because it's a head-to-head. If the Ravens and Chargers, same thing, it's a head-to-head. But if you have 3 or 4 teams, then it becomes a bit of an interesting situation based off of common opponents, based off of conference opponents. So this early, we kind of have to get to week 18 for the actual final playoff scenarios. But for right now, the Ravens stand at number 8. They're not in the playoff race at this point. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with it. But I do think that Baltimore has a pretty good shot if they beat Cincinnati and make the playoffs. They do have to beat Pittsburgh in the final game of their year, but this is huge. The Ravens, they do remember, I think, that Cincinnati drubbing they took in week 7 at home, an embarrassing loss. And now that these two teams match up again, the Ravens have a chance to really derail Cincinnati's season. And Cincinnati has a chance to derail the Ravens' seasons. And Spencer Schultz of the show yesterday talked about how it's kind of rare for these two teams or any two teams in the AFC North to sweep each other. It has happened plenty of times, but these are all hard-fought, gritty games, come down to the wire games, obviously not week 7 against Cincinnati, unfortunately for Baltimore. But yeah, you have two teams who really need this win. It's going to be a game that no team lies down. Hopefully the Ravens get back Lamar Jackson, get back Calais Campbell, get back Chuck Clark and Jimmy Smith and Sammy Watkins and Patrick Ricard and Macari and some of these other guys. So if they can get back some reinforcements, I think that this is a game that the Ravens win. In Pittsburgh, same thing. I think they do lose to the Rams, but if they beat Cincinnati, lose to the Rams, and beat the Steelers, I think that's a recipe for success, in my opinion. Finally here, before we head out, and we actually have one more to get to after Jared's question here, Jared Snyder. Jared asked, do the Ravens try to re-sign any of these one-year guys? If so, who? I'd love to have Houston around as a rear pass rusher and to continue to work with OA, but does he take another contract at a similar price? And so, yeah, there are a couple of guys who are on these one-year contracts that really, I think, could be re-signed in a big way. And I think Houston, you got to start there, pulling up the rest of them. But for me, I think Houston's somebody who, yeah, you can absolutely re-sign a guy like Justin Houston. But the key question is obviously who takes these one-year contracts again? Do you have Justin Houston taking a 1 year, $2 million deal, 1 year, $6 million deal? Right? Who is taking or who are taking those contracts? I think Houston, yeah, absolutely. He can take a 1-2 year deal, and I think that's absolutely fine. But the key question is, does he want to be here? I think he does. And one of the reasons why is, he said in an interview, I can't remember, it was a couple months ago. He said that, yeah, being for the Ravens here, playing for the Ravens, brought back this joy for the game for him. And, he really, it was kind of like what Marcus Peters said, like, he likes being in Baltimore and he brought his joy back. Marcus Peters echoed those same statements and same sentiments. And those are areas where I think, yeah, players who come to Baltimore, veterans who come to Baltimore kind of want to be in Baltimore for the long term. They have nothing but great things to say. And I think that for players like that, example for like Devonta Freeman, who also signed on a 1 year deal, who I think could be really, really great on, like a third down back role. That's something where, yeah, I'd take Houston. I'd take Freeman. I think if those guys have enjoyed their time enough in Baltimore, they could certainly do that. And, you have a guy like LJ Ford, I think they could bring back, who's been out all season. You have Sammy Watkins. Watkins is more of an interesting case. Maybe they want to use that money elsewhere, or if Watkins takes like a $2 million deal, like awesome. But these guys have all bought in. It's just a matter of what they prioritize at this point in their careers. Is it trying to win a Super Bowl with the Ravens? Is it trying to win a Super Bowl somewhere else, getting another big lucrative contract before the end of their careers? I think Justin Houston could definitely resign here. I think Sammy Watkins is more 50-50 for me. I could see them re-signing Devonta Freeman. Latavius Murray, I don't think that's something that they're going to need because he's more of a Gus Edwards back, and with Edwards back healthy, I just don't think they need him. Pernell McPhee, I think, might retire at the end of this season. Jimmy Smith, same thing. Those guys are 1 year contract players. Justin Ellis, I could see them bringing him back, especially, needing continuity and what happens with Brandon Williams and what happens with Calais Campbell. So those are some players that I could see coming back and not coming back. I'd love Justin Houston back. I'd really like Devonta Freeman back as well. I think those are two players who could really help this team out a lot. LJ Fort, Sammy Watkins, some of those other guys too. We'll see what ends up happening. And our final point here, we'll talk about a point from Eric Clark, who pointed me in the direction of a tweet from Josh Siegel. And Siegel ended up saying, Harbaugh's mistake wasn't the second two, was kicking after they scored down 14. If you plan to go for it for the win, doing it the first time allows you the chance to make up for the miss and still tie it rather than deciding the game. And so this is kind of the scenario that the Ravens were in week 14, where it was all right. They want to go for 2 on the first time instead of the second time because you know where you stand. So it would have been the exact same situation as Cleveland, where Baltimore would have been, well, actually a tiny bit different. You would have been in that situation down by 8 instead of 9. But if you get the 2-point conversion, you're down 6, and if you miss it, you're still down 8. So I agree and disagree. I'm right in the middle there. I think that the Ravens, they are aggressive and they are going to go for the win. It seems like in every situation there. And it makes sense, right? It's still a 1 possession game there. If you miss a 2-point conversion the first time, you're in a situation where if you go down and score again, you just have to get a 2-point conversion to tie the game. But if you miss it the first time, at least you know where you stand and you're like, all right, well, now we know we need to go for 2 to tie the game. Whereas you're not in that make or break. Oh, do we tie the game? Do we win the game there? So yeah, that's fair. But at the same time, the Ravens, they kick that extra point. They drive down the field again. Then they're putting themselves in the situation to take the lead in that scenario where you still have that opportunity. So, yeah, it's a good point made by Josh there. I think that the Ravens, so many different scenarios, so many different analytics and whatever. The analytics is the key word there, but the Ravens are one of the worst 2-point conversion teams in the NFL. It's not a secret. I think they do need to get better in those aspects. The play call could have been a bit better, that 2-point conversion. So next time they go for it, hopefully they'll have a better play call in mind and they'll be able to convert. And if it is for the game, they'll be able to do that because they've lost their last 3 games by a combined 4 points. And I know that's just been heartbreaking for so many people, knowing that instead of being at 8-6, they could be, whether it's a ton of different records, 11-3, or some of those crazy other records that they could have had and still be atop the AFC North, be the number 1 seed in the AFC. So, 2 points have been a struggle for the Ravens. They've gone for them. They've missed them. A lot of different, should they have done this, should have they done that, a lot of controversy, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into crossover Thursday with Locked On Bengals. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.